It was the eve of the biggest celebration in all of Igbo land, the annual Yam Festival. In the small village of Umueziala, the excitement could be felt in the air as the villagers prepared for the coming festivities. Chidi, a young man of 25, had just returned home from the city to visit his family for the holidays. He was looking forward to indulging in all the traditional foods and activities that the Yam Festival was known for. As he walked through the dusty streets of his village, he could smell the aroma of roasted yams and peppery stews wafting through the air. Children ran around excitedly, their laughter filling the warm evening. Chidi made his way to his family's compound, greeted by the warm embrace of his mother, Neoma. "My son, you have returned home," she exclaimed joyfully. "We have missed you so much. Come, let me show you all the preparations we have made for the festival tomorrow." Neoma led Chidi into their humble mud hut, where his father, Okafor, sat whittling away at a piece of wood, crafting one of the traditional masks worn during the festival. "Ah, Chidi, you're back," Okafor said gruffly, looking up from his work. "Good, good. There's much work to be done before tomorrow." Chidi spent the evening helping his family complete the preparations, grinding yam flour, weaving baskets, and hanging decorations around the compound. As night fell, the sound of drums and chanting could be heard from the village square, signaling the start of the festivities. "Come, let us join the others," Neoma said, ushering Chidi and Okafor out of the house. The three of them made their way to the center of the village, where a large bonfire had been lit and people were dancing and singing traditional Igbo songs. Chidi felt a sense of belonging as he joined in the celebration, reconnecting with his roots. As the night wore on, the festivities only grew more lively. Men donned intricate masks and costumes, performing ritualistic dances while the women ululated and clapped along. Chidi watched in awe, mesmerized by the vibrant display of his cultural heritage. Eventually, the music and dancing began to die down as the villagers grew tired. Chidi bid his parents good night and made his way back to the family's compound, ready to get some rest before the main events of the Yam Festival the next day. But as Chidi lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual nighttime sounds of the village, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of owls, were strangely absent. An eerie silence had settled over Umezela. Chidi strained his ears, trying to detect any sign of movement or life outside. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness. Chidi bolted upright, his heart pounding. More screams followed, growing louder and more panicked. He quickly got up and rushed outside, joining his parents who had also been roused by the commotion. "What's happening?" Chidi asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Okafor replied, his brow furrowed with concern. "But we must go and see." The three of them hurried towards the village square, where a crowd had gathered. Chidi pushed his way through the throng of people, his eyes widening in horror at the scene before him. Sprawled on the ground was the lifeless body of Ezine, the village midwife. Deep gashes marred her once peaceful face, and her throat had been savagely torn open. Blood pooled around her, staining the earth a sickening crimson. "Who could have done this?" Neoma cried, her hands clasped over her mouth in shock. The crowd erupted in panicked murmurs, everyone frantically trying to make sense of the gruesome murder. Chidi scanned the faces of his fellow villagers, searching for any sign of guilt or fear. Suddenly, a loud, unnatural howl pierced the air, sending chills down everyone's spine. Heads swiveled in the direction of the sound, which seemed to be coming from the edge of the village, near the entrance to the sacred forest. Without a moment's hesitation, the village chief, Eze Obiora, stepped forward. "We must not let whatever beast did this roam free," he declared, his voice booming with authority. "Gather your weapons, men. We will hunt it down and put an end to this madness." The men of the village quickly armed themselves with machetes, clubs, and spears, while the women and children were ushered back to their homes for safety. Chidi wanted to join the search party, but Okafor held him back. "No, Chidi. You must stay here with your mother. This is no place for a young man like you," his father said sternly. Chidi reluctantly obeyed, watching as the men disappeared into the darkness, their cries and the sound of their footsteps fading into the night. He and Neoma retreated to their compound, the eerie silence once again settling over the village. Hours passed, and still no sign of the search party or the creature they had gone to hunt. Chidi and Neoma huddled together, their nerves frayed, jumping at the slightest sound. The anxiety and fear were palpable. Just as the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, the sound of footsteps and anguished wails reached their ears. Chidi and Neoma rushed outside to see the men of the village returning, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and terror. "What happened?" Chidi asked, his voice trembling. One of the men, his clothes torn and stained with blood, stepped forward. "It was a massacre," he said, his words barely audible. "The creature. It was too strong, too fast. We couldn't stop it. It killed them all." Chidi felt his heart sink as he realized the devastating implication of the man's words. "No," he whispered, his eyes welling with tears. Neoma let out a mournful wail, collapsing to her knees. "Okafor, my husband," she cried, her sobs echoing through the silent village. Chidi stood there, numb with shock and grief, as the rest of the villagers gathered around, their own cries of anguish joining Neoma's. The Yam Festival, a celebration of life and tradition, had been transformed into a nightmare of unimaginable horror. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the villagers gathered the bodies of their fallen loved ones, their faces etched with a mixture of sorrow and determination. They knew that they could not let this atrocity go unanswered. In the days that followed, the village mourned their losses, but also prepared for war. Weapons were sharpened, traps were set, and the elders convened to devise a plan to confront the monstrous creature that had brought such devastation to their community. Chidi, still reeling from the tragedy, knew that he had to be a part of the effort to avenge his father and the other victims. Despite his mother's pleas for him to stay behind, he insisted on joining the hunting party, determined to confront the beast that had taken so much from them. The day of the hunt arrived, and the men of Umueziala, their faces painted with tribal markings and their bodies adorned with charms and talismans, set out into the dense forest that bordered the village. Chidi, his machete gripped tightly in his hand, followed closely behind, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and righteous fury. As they delved deeper into the forest, the eerie silence was broken only by the snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves. The men moved cautiously, their senses heightened, searching for any sign of the creature. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Chidi's spine. The men quickened their pace, following the sound until they reached a small clearing. There, in the center of the space, stood a creature that defied all description. It was a monstrous amalgamation of man and beast, its body covered in a thick, matted fur, and its features a twisted, inhuman visage. Glowing yellow eyes burned with a primal, savage hunger, and its massive claws and jaws promised a swift and merciless end to any who dared to challenge it. The men of Umuesiala, their battle cries ringing out, charged towards the beast, their weapons raised high. Chidi, his heart racing, joined the fray, slashing and hacking with his machete, determined to avenge his father's death. But the creature was too strong, too swift. It swiped and snapped, its razor-sharp claws and teeth tearing through the flesh of the villagers with ease. One by one, the men fell, their anguished screams piercing the air. Chidi, his weapon knocked from his hands, found himself face to face with the monstrous being. He stared into its piercing eyes, paralyzed with fear, as it drew closer, its hot, fetid breath washing over him. Just as the creature was about to strike, a familiar voice called out, "Chidi, run, my son." It was Neoma, standing at the edge of the clearing, her own machete raised high. Chidi, finding newfound strength, scrambled to his feet and fled towards his mother, the creature's roar of frustration echoing behind him. Neoma, her face etched with determination, stood her ground, swinging her weapon with all her might as the beast charged towards her. Chidi watched in horror as the creature pounced, its jaws clamping down on his mother's delicate frame. Neoma's anguished scream pierced the air, and Chidi felt his heart shatter as he witnessed the life leave her eyes. With a final, triumphant roar, the beast turned its attention back to Chidi, its lips pulled back in a menacing snarl. Chidi, his body trembling with grief and fear, knew that he was the last survivor. He had to find a way to escape, to warn the rest of the village, and to put an end to this nightmare. Summoning every ounce of courage, Chidi turned and ran, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. The creature, its massive form crashing through the undergrowth, gave chase, its thunderous footsteps closing in behind him. Chidi darted between the towering trees, his lungs burning, his mind racing. He knew the forest like the back of his hand, and he desperately tried to put that knowledge to use, weaving through the dense foliage and using the uneven terrain to his advantage. At last, he burst out of the forest, the familiar sight of the village compound coming into view. He stumbled through the gates, his cries for help ringing out, only to be met with an eerie silence. Chidi's heart sank as he realized that the rest of the villagers were nowhere to be seen. Had the creature already claimed them all? He had no time to ponder the grim possibility, for the beast was still in pursuit, its savage roars echoing through the empty streets. Chidi ran towards his family's compound, his mind racing to come up with a plan. He burst through the door, frantically scanning the room for anything he could use as a weapon. His eyes landed on his father's prized machete, the blade gleaming in the dim light. Gripping the weapon tightly, Chidi steeled himself, waiting with bated breath as the creature drew closer. He could hear its heavy footsteps, the ground trembling with each step, until finally, the monstrous form appeared in the doorway. The beast let out a deafening roar, its yellow eyes burning with a hunger for blood. Chidi, his heart pounding, charged forward, his machete slashing through the air. The blade connected with the creature's flank, eliciting a pained howl, but the beast was far from defeated. It swiped at Chidi with its massive claws, forcing him to dodge and weave, his movements becoming increasingly desperate. The two engaged in a deadly dance, each one fighting for their life, until Chidi saw an opening. With a final mighty swing, he brought the machete down, slicing through the creature's neck. The beast let out a gurgling, agonized cry as it collapsed to the ground, its life ebbing away. Chidi stood there, his body trembling, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had survived the onslaught of the monstrous creature that had brought such devastation to his village. But as the adrenaline began to subside, the weight of his loss crashed down upon him. His parents, his friends, his entire community, all gone, victims of this horrific nightmare. Chidi sank to his knees, his sobs echoing through the empty compound. He had won the battle, but at what cost? The Yam Festival, a celebration of life and tradition, had been transformed into a living hell, a testament to the fragility of human existence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desolate village, Chidi knew that he could not remain here. He had to leave, to find a way to warn the rest of the world about the monstrous evil that lurked in the forest of Igbo land. With a heavy heart, he gathered what few supplies he could and set out, determined to survive and to ensure that the tragedy of Umueziala never happened again.